What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt. This week, we're going to be talking about white-black in Avatar. This episode is going to be very straightforward. It's going to be kind of drafting archetypes-esque if you were listening when Sam Black was still doing limited content. I'm just really going to walk through what I think of the white-black deck. I've been winning with it a lot. I'm going to talk about what has led to my success, and then I'm going to sort of break it down into a couple different sections, talking about the various aspects of the deck. So like I just mentioned, I've been doing very, very well with white-black. I've drafted it 4 times so far, and it has trophied all 4 times. There are kind of 3 elements to this deck, 3 parts of why I think this deck is good, or like reasons you would get into it. Number 1 is that on the white side, I think white just has good cards. I would put white as the best color in the set, personally. I think most of the white cards just play really well with other white cards, and I think that it just has really high quality cards altogether, especially at uncommon. Black, I do think, is the worst color in the set, but what black does have going for it is I think it has the best rares in the set. It has some really insane rares and mythics, and I think those are very good reasons to play black. And I don't think black is so much behind the other colors that you should like never touch it, obviously, because I'm talking about white black and I've had a lot of success with it so far. And then the third element is just kind of that I think that the sacrifice package, the sacrifice synergies in this color combination, this is sort of billed as white black sacrifice, that stuff's supported just enough to be worth doing. I think it doesn't work well in every single version of white black. I'm going to talk about sort of the sliding scale between like you have a lot of good black cards versus a lot of good white cards. I think the more you're on the black side of things, the more you'll lean into the sacrifice stuff. But I do think there is a lot of sacrifice stuff worth doing in the set, a lot of the sacrifice cards, especially the signpost uncommon, which is Tolls of War, which is white-black for an enchantment. When it enters, create a clue. And then whenever you sack a permanent during your turn, you make a 1/1 ally, and that only triggers once per turn. I think this card's really strong. I've started taking it pretty highly just because I like playing the white-black deck quite a bit, and I think it's pretty strong at this point, especially because I think people are underrating black cards. And I do think the blacker your deck is, the more on the black side of white-black you are, the better this card gets. And I actually, on the other hand, could see cutting it if you were very heavy white and really wanted to play like a more assertive deck. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. How do you get into white-black? I think it's mostly about the black rares. I can conceive of drafts where you start white and black sort of opens up and you would have just enough good black sacrifice cards to warrant playing this strategy, especially if you get multiple Tolls of War. But in all of the cases I've drafted this, and I think most cases where you will draft this, if you are like heavy white and you get past a really good black rare, or on the other end, if you open a black rare and white starts flowing, I think that's the sweet spot for this deck. And I'll get into some of the reasons why I think it's important to know that specifically about this color combination. And this might seem trivially obvious to some people. Like, yes, of course, if you're deep in the best color in the set and you get past a rare in a worse color, you're going to take the rare and just pair it with your good white cards. But I do think this blueprint applies to a lot of color combinations and a lot of colors, and I don't think it's something I've talked about on the podcast yet, so I do think it's worth diving into. I've had really good black rares in all 4 of my white-black trophies. I've had 5 copies of Obsessive Pursuit in the 4 trophies that I have. That card I think is exceptionally good in this deck. I'll get into that later. I'm going to start with the white cards though, and talk about the black cards and the black rares later. And the white cards I think are just good. So last week I was talking a lot about red aggro, and I have shifted my thinking in this format much away from aggro and more into mid-range. Just to touch on the core mid-range concept, in my opinion, mid-range means you lie somewhere in the middle of the sliding scale from I expect to always be ahead of my opponent to I expect to always be playing defensively from behind. You're accepting that some games you're going to be the beatdown and others your opponent is going to be the beatdown, and you want your cards to play both ways. And this was something that Ben on Lords of Limited mentioned on their episode this week, is that it's really important for your cards in this format to play both ways because board presence is so important. I think a lot of the best cards in this set are lower on the curve. Decks are able to curve out very effectively. I think for the majority of decks in this format, the vast majority of decks in this format, you want your cards to be able to play offense and defense relatively well. Obviously, you might be more assertive, you might be more defensive, but I do think it's important to be able to play both roles effectively. And below rare, I think white does this better than any other color in the format. People tend to think of white as an aggro color, or they tend to focus on the white cards making a lot of tokens being something that's especially aggressive. But making multiple bodies is something that is also very good on defense. And I think a lot of these cards, like the Kyoshi Warriors, which is just a 4-mana 3/3, make a 1/1, they're both allies. That's a card that plays offense and defense really effectively because you can attack with one of the bodies, leave one back, and it plays perfectly into a mid-range game plan. And because decks are more assertive in this format in general, lower curve, better curving out than they have been in other sets of 2025, I do think it's really important for your cards to play both ways. And this goes for cards that are too defensive as well, of course. And that's one of the faults I've had with Forecasting Fortune Teller, which is the 2-mana 1/3 make a clue. I thought this was going to be a runaway best common in the set. It's merely good. Like, I think it's one of the best commons in the set, definitely top 10, maybe top 5. But I've had a lot of issues with this where I feel like I need to be in the beatdown role, and a 2-mana 1/3 just does not get the job done, as well as like a Grizzly Bear or a 2-mana 3/1. So talking about the white cards I specifically like, we'll start with the commons. I'm just going to honestly list most of the commons. I think they're mostly pretty good. The card I think is the best white common is Airbending Lesson, which is 3-mana instant, airbend target non-land permanent, and draw card. I think this is a card, this is going to be a very common theme with all the white cards. I think it plays offense and defense really effectively. You can clear a blocker to get an attack in. You can airbend one of your own things defensively in response to a removal spell. You can airbend an attacker to save yourself from a attack that would go poorly, buy yourself some time. I think this card's just very versatile. It has felt closer to repulse than not. I know that was one of the big hot topics for the first week of the format. And I love this card. I think it's excellent in every white deck. Path to Redemption has exceeded my expectations. This is the white pacifism where you can pay 5 and exile it to create a 1/1. There's been a lot of discourse about pacifism being washed in limited in the 2020s. I think it's probably a little overrated still, but it tends to perform pretty well set after set. Yes, your thing can get airbent. Yes, they can still use it to cast their waterbend stuff, but just making something not able to attack and block is still fairly effective removal. It's going to have some downsides, but still performs very well. Just some random creatures I like. I've been pretty impressed with Glider Kids. This is the 3-mana 2/3. When it enters, scry 1, it has flying. Just a solid card. I already mentioned Kyoshi Warriors. I think that card's totally fine. In the 2-drop slot, I've been pretty impressed with Compassionate Healer. This is the 2-mana 2/2. When it attacks, you scry 1 and gain a life. Don't think this card is exceptional. It's just played well. And then also in the 2-drop slot, I have been pretty impressed with Pretending Poxbearers. This is the 2-mana 2/1 that dies into a 1/1. Another card that just fills that mid-range, play both ways game plan very effectively. A couple more interesting commons. Razor Rings. This is the 2-mana instant, deal 4 damage to an attacking or blocking creature, and you gain life equal to the excess damage. If you're super aggro, if you only care about dealing damage to your opponent, these types of cards tend to perform really poorly because your opponent gets the choice of how to block. They can sort of read into this. And you also, when the creature is declared blocked, you don't deal the extra damage when you destroy it. However, life gain is really important on this card. It helps racing situations. And if you're in a mid-range battle and you're the one attacking and you still kill the thing and you both gain the life effectively, I think this card is totally fine there. I've been pretty happy with this card in most of my white decks, except for the ones that are super low to the ground and lean. I think just it plays both ways fairly effectively with the life gain attached. I think the life gain is enough of a bonus. Kind of like the card from Bloomborough, the Bats card. It was Sonar Strike, which was a very similar card. A more offensive card that I've been very impressed with is Water Tribe Captain. This is the 3-mana 3/3 with the activated ability 5. Give your creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. With Tolls of War, I end up with a lot of tokens on the battlefield, and this is a pretty effective way to push a lot of damage when you have a wide board. I really like it in aggro decks as well, or more assertive decks. An underrated part of this card is that it's a very high priority target for removal. So if you're playing in a deck that has a lot of high priority targets for removal, whether that be flyers, whether that be really good rares, having a lot of cards that individually matter can tax your opponent's removal. And that can be a really effective strategy in a mid-range deck where you are playing a lot of good, just high quality cards and making it so that your opponent has to care about more cards on your side of the battlefield is a really effective tool for like winning a mid-range war. I do like this card more than Wandering Musicians. That is the red-white hybrid 4-mana 2/5. When it attacks, creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn. I won't play Musicians in a more like defensive mid-range deck, but I will play Water Tribe Captain in those decks because it sits a little lower on the curve. And the activated ability, the threat of it can matter in a lot of games too. But I do like Wandering Musicians quite a bit in my more assertive decks. If we move to White's uncommons, White has absolute bangers at uncommon. It's really stacked. The cream of the crop, the three ones that I think are above the rest are Aang, the Last Airbender, which is the 4-mana 3/2 flying. When it enters, airbend a non-land permanent, and when you cast a lesson, it gains lifelink until end of turn. You also have Earth Kingdom Jailer, which is the 3-mana 3/3. When it enters, you exile something with mana value 3 or greater until it leaves. And then Water Tribe Rallier, which is the 2-mana 2/2 with the Waterbending 5 ability to get a creature with power 3 or less from your top 4, I think. These are just all very individually strong cards. Like I was saying with Water Tribe Captain, these are some more cards that your opponent has to care about each of these individually, and it can really tax their removal. I just think they're very strong in their own. I'm very happy to pick these and move into White for them, just because it's so deep at common as well. A couple of other White uncommons that I like a decent amount: Invasion Reinforcements, which is the 2-mana 1/1 flash, make a 1/1, and the Momo, which is like the 1-drop flyer that when it leaves, you get to like select an option. I think these are a step down from the top 3, but I think they're still very strong. Earth Kingdom Protectors, like I've been saying about protecting your high value threats from removal with Water Tribe Captain, or like taxing your opponent's removal. Earth Kingdom Protectors is another way to do that really effectively. This is the 1-mana 1/1 vigilance that you can sacrifice to give another ally indestructible. It protects those threats that I mentioned before. There's also Sokka, Lateral Strategist, which is the 3-mana 2/4 Azorius uncommon. It has vigilance, and when Sokka, at least one other creature's attack, draw a card. This is another really high priority threat that your opponent needs to deal with. And Earth Kingdom Protector is giving you just a little bit of extra resilience into removal, can really help you press your advantage in a mid-range battle. I do like Glider Staff quite a bit. This is the 3-mana equipment. When it enters, you airbend a creature, and then it has equip 2 to give something 1/1 and flying. I've cut this in my more defensive black-white decks. I think anytime you're like heavy base white, this is going to be great. But if you are a more defensive deck and you have like better stuff up the curve to present inevitability to your opponent, I think there are better options. So don't be afraid to cut this, but it does make most of my white decks, and I think it's a fairly high pick. In general, I've very much internalized the creatures that are expensive and don't have an enters ability or protection are really bad. A couple of 4s that I've been pretty underwhelmed with after playing are Suki Kyoshi Warrior, which is the 4-mana star 4 green-white hybrid, power equal to the number of creatures you control, and when she attacks, you make a 1/1 tapped and attacking. I do think this card is pretty good. It's much better the lower curve your deck is, the more assertive your deck is. Like if you're more mid-range, this is kind of like a dumb threat that just dies to a removal spell. But if you're already pushing your advantage in the early game, I think this is effective in those types of decks. Just a little less universally good than I thought it would be. And the other card is Hey Bye, which is the black-white hybrid. It's a 4-mana 3/3. When it enters or attacks, you may sack another creature or artifact if you do put 2/1/1 counters on it. And then when it leaves the battlefield, you move those counters to another target creature you control. I was really impressed with this in early access, and I've cooled off on it a lot after seeing the white decks in action more. I just don't think that this card really, like, it can be a 5/5 and then attack is a 7/7, but you really, it's so bad when you're on the defense. But as a 4-mana threat, there's just like better things to do with your mana, and it doesn't really fit the cohesive game plan that white is presenting. Gather the White Lotus. This is the mono white payoff. It's 5-mana sorcery, create a 1/1 ally creature token for each planes you control and scry 2. Definitely pay attention to this. I've gotten this passed to me late quite a bit. You don't need to be mono white to play it. It's obviously insane if you are mono white. I played this on 10 planes and been like decently happy with it. The kind of lowest you want to go is making 3 tokens, and 10 is a little iffy for that, but you can also play it later and still get 3 or 4 and it performs pretty well. I think you want at least 12 to be really happy with this card, and obviously if you can get higher than that, it becomes even more powerful. But I think this card is a reason to warp your deck around it. Like this wants you to warp your deck around it and build with like 12 planes, and I think the reward is worth it very much. Just like I've been saying earlier, mid-range decks, even if you're not like a dedicated like go wide pump your team deck, mid-range decks just love making a lot of creatures because you have so many options of how do I attack, how do I block, I can like leave some back to block and still attack with a bunch. So I think this card is very good and you should definitely pay attention to it. And I've used it as a signal to get really heavy into white before if I get this like 5th pick. One last white card, Team Avatar. This is a 3-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. You can also pay 3 and discard the card to deal damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature. I think this is pretty niche, honestly. Like, if you're in a more assertive white deck, you probably don't need this to break through a board stall. You can find other more effective tools. But there is like a flavor of, especially white-black, where you're a little on the defensive side and you're lacking a little bit of late game power, but you do make a lot of creatures. And I think this is a very effective tool for punching through the last couple points of damage, especially if you have flyers like Glider Kids or an unblockable creature like June, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Let's shift gears to black. Black is the clear worst color in the format. You'll see when I go through the list of commons and uncommons, I had so many commons and uncommons in white that I liked and wanted to talk about. The list is very short for black. However, it does have really insane rares. I won't read all of these rares out, but there's Rise of Sozin, Fire Nation Drill, Ko the Face Stealer, Raven Eagle, Phoenix Fleet Airship. There's another board wipe in Day of the Black Sun you can build around. I've mentioned that I love Obsessive Pursuit. If you go to 17 lands, this is sitting a little bit further down in the game in hand win rate, but I think this card is amazing. I will actually read this one because this is a reason I've gotten into white-black multiple times. This is 2-mana enchantment. When it enters, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life and create a clue. And whenever you attack, you put X/1/1 counters on target attacking creature, where X is the number of permanents you've sacrificed this turn. If X is 3 or greater, it gains lifelink. There's also the rare Dimir Azula, which is double black, but only single blue. So you can splash this pretty effectively in white-black as well. I've felt that in the past week, people are rightfully scared off of black, but are passing these really good black rares a little bit more than I think they should. Like, I've gotten Rise of Sozin like 3rd pick a couple times. Obviously, I've gotten Obsessive Pursuit a lot because I played 5 copies of my 4 trophies. So I think that people are over adjusting to move away from black. I think you should be really concerned about getting into black for its commons and uncommons, unless there's like a really clear direction that you're going to go. But I don't think that the color is so bad that you shouldn't draft a fantastic rare like the ones that I've mentioned to avoid the color. So which black cards do I like? I'll talk about some commons. I think the best black common is not Sold Out, which is the 4-mana exile spell. It's actually Deadly Precision, which is the Bone Splinters variant. You can pay for or sack a creature or artifact to destroy a target creature. In black white in particular, you don't really want to be sacrificing your tokens to this kind of effect, but the games in this format are so tight. They're a much lower curve. There are things that you need to answer on curve mana efficiently, and this is a very good way to do it. And the buyout clause on these types of cards always bump them up way up. Like Eaten Alive is so much better than original Bone Splinters. After those 2 black removal spells, black kind of drops off a cliff. especially if you're leaning into the heavier white aspect of black-white. This is kind of what I have referred to as like the sliding scale between white and black. I think if you can manage to be very heavy white and you're just sort of playing a couple of the really good like black removal spells, I think that's a very good place to be. And then the further you get into black, the more you want to lean on your rares. And the rares are a good reason to slow the game down, which is what a lot of the black cards want you to do. So if you're in the more grindy black space, these are not cards I want to play in like a white assertive deck, but like Callous Inspector can be okay. This is the 1-mana 1/1 menace. When it dies, you lose life, make a clue. There's Corrupt Court Official, which is the 2-mana 1/1. They discard a card. Canyon Crawler's okay. This is the land cycler that makes a food. And then Merchant of Many Hats, which is like the 2-mana 2/2 that you can pay 3 to return it from your graveyard to your hand. I actually like a couple of the black hybrid cards a decent amount. Messenger Hawk, the Dimir hybrid, it's 3 mana, make a clue. And then you have a 1/2 flyer that gets +2/+0 when you draw your second card. And Earth Village Ruffians, which is the 3 mana 3/1 that dies into Earthbend 2. Both of these are kind of like 2 rectangle cards that can be really good in the grindier black decks I've found. When I'm playing Tolls of War or Obsessive Pursuit, which I've had the great fortune to do a lot, I've been pretty happy with the first copy of Beetle-Headed Merchants. This is the 5 mana 5/4. When it attacks, you may sacrifice a creature or artifact. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. This is a 5 mana creature with no enters ability and no protection. So it really is niche, but if you are in the sacrifice space, this helps you crack your clues at the cost of no mana and present a giant threat. So I've been pretty happy with this card in that space as well. After that, I really don't like any of the other black cards. And I think that if you play too many of the cards I haven't mentioned, your win rate will suffer. Like, I think the black cards are rightfully very, very bad. Like, Swamp Snare Trap is the -5, -3 aura. I think this card is just terrible. Like, you should really, really be honest with yourself if you really need that extra piece of removal to play this card. Moving on to the uncommons, I'll just run through this pretty quick. It's very similar list. I really like the black removal spells, Heartless Act and Epic Downfall. I really like June in white-black. June is a 2 mana 2/2. June can't be blocked as long as you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, and you can pay 1, sack a creature to make a clue during your turn. It's really nice with Team Avatar, the sort of exalted trigger card. Just pecking in for damage, being able to transfer your 1/1s into clues in certain matchups is really effective. I really like this card in white-black, especially if you have Tolls of War. Judy, I feel similar, but I think this card's a little worse. This is the 2 mana 2/2. You can pay a black, surveil 1, and then create a token that's a copy of this card, and then you have to sacrifice something. June is like above the line, where I think June is good enough in most like white assertive decks that I will play June. Judy is below the line, where I would rather play the good, like just bread and butter white cards. But like I said, the grindier you are, the more you're leaning on your black rares or just rares in general, I think the better Judy becomes, because that's the space where you do want to lean more into the sacrifice space. One more black uncommon I want to mention, Cat Gator. This is the 7 mana 3/2 lifelink that when it enters deals damage equal to the number of swamps you control to any target. I've done this before in a grindier black-white deck. It was really, really effective. I think this one is totally fine to play with like 10 swamps. If you're in white-black, you can airbend this with Airbending Lesson or Aang or Glider Staff, and I think this is very much worth doing. I would actually imagine that this performs best in white-black than any other color combination because of the airbending synergies. The rest of the black uncommons, just please don't trick yourself into playing them. They can be okay in a pinch. Like I do like Azula on the Hunt in certain decks, but really black really suffers at lower rarities, and you're just better off just not touching the more sketchy cards and just leaning on the good cards. And like I've been sort of hammering home this whole episode, you shouldn't really be getting into black for cards below rare. And I do think there's some stigma against this sentiment, because like limited is we generally talk about the commons and uncommons more than anything else. But I do think that has changed as play boosters changed the cards that we have access to. And I think that you should be more reliably thinking about rares in the draft, especially in this format where there are a lot of rares and the commons are generally lower power level. I do find that rares really define my decks, and my decks do function a lot of the times proportional to the number of rares they have. And while some will attribute that to like, you just got lucky and opened a bunch of rares, I do think that drafting with that in mind, either holding on to the power that you already have or searching for power in the deck when you're finding your second color, are really important tools to drafting with play boosters. And it's something that I personally really enjoy about play boosters and draft in 25 in general. The last sort of section I want to talk about in this episode is just a couple interactions in the sacrifice cards that I think are worth bringing up, and just why the sacrifice package works pretty well in certain decks. Like I've been saying, the higher card quality in your deck, the more you can rely on slowing the game down to win, because the slower the game is, the more of your deck you're going to see, and the better cards you're going to see because you're just going to see more cards as the game slows down. I think Tolls of War in particular is a very, very effective tool for slowing the game down. If you have a decent handful of sacrifice cards, especially if you have Tolls in multiple, which I've gotten so far multiple times. Tolls lets you chump. It lets you combat a wide board out of your opponent. It's just a very effective tool to be able to generate 1/1s turn after turn. And then you can use stuff like Team Avatar or Water Tribe Captain to sort of turn the corner once you've stabilized, or you're just drawing to a great black rare like Rise of Sozin or Phoenix Fleet Airship. Some individual cards that I think you should be aware of: Kyoshi Battle Fan. If you do have a couple sacrifice cards, I think this is a very fine 2-drop to play. I found myself playing this in a lot of my black-white decks. It's a 2-drop that blocks and dies into equipment that can either be used to pressure a little more effectively or have something that you can sacrifice on curve without actually sacrificing too much power or toughness. Another thing is, keep in mind that sacrificing your lands, the lands that you can pay for and tap to draw a card, that does trigger Tolls of War and your other sacrifice payoffs. Similarly, Barrels of Blasting Jelly is another thing that you can sacrifice to do something. You can sacrifice this to deal 5 damage. I think as the format goes on, it's going to be harder to get card quality out of your deck. I think that splashing is going to be a very effective tool in this format, and Barrels helps you splash and it's synergistic removal. And I do think that Tolls of War is a card that I'm pretty interested in splashing in a lot of decks. I'm very excited to enter my sort of 3-color pile era of this format. Probably we have like another week or two before I get to that point, but do expect an episode on Barrels of Blasting Jelly in the somewhat near future. One other synergistic piece of removal is Path to Redemption, the pacifism aura. When you pay 5 mana to make the 1/1 and exile the creature, this does sacrifice itself. It didn't have to do that, because if it just had exiled the creature, this card would fall off. But because it did, they did literally print the words "sacrifice this aura" on the card. It does also trigger Tolls of War and your other sacrifice payoffs. So that's going to wrap it up. I like to get back to a nice little bread and butter episode, just diving deep on a specific archetype every once in a while. I don't have the fully formed concept for what I'm going to talk about next week, but I do think it's going to be a little more broad. Before I go, I do want to mention something. A couple of weeks ago, I put an episode out about recapping the rotisserie draft of my Arena Cube. And I mentioned that we were going to do one again in the future. And I wanted to give like a sort of an open invitation. If you are interested in participating in the rotisserie draft of my cube, you can send me a message either on Blue Sky or Discord, and I'll get you in. The only thing that you need is an Arena account with enough wildcards to craft your deck. That's probably going to be about like 15 rares, 15 mythic wildcards. So if you're interested in participating in that, if you don't know what it is, you can go back and watch the episode on rotisserie draft. If you are interested in participating, just shoot me a message. You can find me on Discord at SamP6, Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. We're going to kick that off Wednesday, December 3rd, but I'd like to lock in the pods at least the weekend before. So if you're interested, send me a message as soon as you can. Thanks for listening. See you next week.